Good morning, and welcome to our monthly webinar series where we have experts from key areas that institutions of higher ed need to grow their institutions. My name is Dr. Drumm McNaughton, and I'm the CEO of the Change Leader. We're a management consultancy which provides holistic and progressive approaches to creating vibrant and financially sustainable education institutions. Today's webinar is entitled Strategic Planning and Management for Higher Ed Institutions, How to Create, Implement, and Sustain Growth in Today's Market. This means exactly what it says, that we're going to talk about the strategic planning process and ultimately how institutions can change their financial performance through holistic approaches to planning, implementation, and sustaining change. There was a study that came out a few years ago from the American Quality Foundation in conjunction with Ernst & Young. They published a study in which they looked at 945 different management practices over 580 organizations in the US, Japan, and Canada. And the best practices metrics that they used were market performance, operations, productivity, and financial performance. What they found was there were only 3 universally beneficial practices that had any kind of significant impact on metrics, regardless of where the institution was in its starting point, i.e. startup, growth, devolving, etc. Those practices are strategic planning with good implementation practices, business process improvement if they're focused on your customer, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And then continuous broadening of the breadth and depth of leadership and management practices. Today, we're going to talk about all 3. So let's get started. We're seeing a lot of turmoil in higher ed at this point in time. A lot of things need to be changing and certainly are. There's a lot of resistance to change in a lot of different ways. So I'm wondering if this really sounds like your institution. If your enrollments are down, if they're trending down, your revenue's not meeting current expenses, or you're on a shoestring budget to where you really can't invest in your people or your organization like you need to. Are you borrowing from your endowment, or even worse, you don't have an endowment? You don't have an institutional strategic plan. It's not followed, it's not updated, and you don't have a corresponding academic strategic plan, or it's not aligned with your institutional strategic plan. Your faculty actions, and of course, part of academic institutions is we have faculty, and they're very, very smart people in their own particular areas. But unfortunately, a lot of times the faculty actions don't really relate to the current environment in which we're operating. They're more like the good old days of the early 2000s, or even during the 2006 to 2012, when enrollments were very much higher than they are now. Or, faculty being as smart as they are, they think they should have a greater say in everything, and sometimes they become obstructionist. We have a new normal. This is a study that we did last year, which talked about the business issues that institutions have. The top issue that the cabinet saw was affordability of education, increasing reliance on tuition, decreasing or stagnant revenues, or diversification of revenues. Well, this year's study was a little bit different in that it had a lot more issues going on. The number one issue that folks came up with is retention of current students. The demographics have shifted, and because of that, any student that universities get, they want to be able to hold on to. That brings up a whole other host of challenges across the institution to be able to do that. So that's one particular issue. Obviously, the increasing reliance on tuition is another one that they had, and the decreasing and stagnant revenues and diversification were certainly there as well. So, those are some of the things that people are seeing now. And in fact, Inside Higher Ed did their annual survey of business officers, your chief operating officers and CFOs of institutions, and they said that all the press that's out there of the crisis in higher ed, especially financial, is actually worse reporting this year than last year. This year, 72% of them are believing there is an issue. So we really have a new normal. We already mentioned that the number of traditional college-age students are decreasing. 40% of the 7.5 million undergrad students are attending two-year colleges, and over half of that number are taking online or distance education courses. Unfortunately, students and parents at this point believe there's less value in higher education. And it's interesting because when you look at this particular fact, if you mention higher ed, they feel there's value, but if you mention college and university, they feel like there's less value. Here's a biggie. 98% of all institutions look alike, they teach the same subjects, and they have the same degrees and programs. This is incredibly troubling because what happens is it's all about pricing. In fact, some of our partners that we work with have said the biggest single reason that a student will choose a university has to do with the price and the cost of their degree. Another big reason for that or another big reason that students choose to make a decision is the distance from home. The median, and this is from Aslanian research, the median distance from home for students for public universities is 18 miles, privates 46, and community colleges 8. I mean, education, has it become a commodity? There are many people who think so. My buddy Albert used to say insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, unfortunately, that's what we're doing in higher ed now. We've got to change the paradigm, change the thought models, because the external world has changed and we're not changing fast enough to keep up with it. So today what we're going to do is show you a new way of thinking about higher ed, and hopefully you'll be able to put some of these actions into effect in the near future. First, we're going to start with 3 requirements for creating sustainable higher ed institutions. The first of these is holistic thinking. Leaders must focus on the big picture, do ongoing strategic planning, not just every 3 or 5 years, and measuring outcomes. I know that accountability is a really bad term for many places in higher ed, but we've got to start taking on more accountability for student outcomes, student graduation rates, and are they able to find a meaningful job when they get out. The second of these is alignment. Institutions' strategies, structures, and processes must work together. We're going to talk a little bit more about alignment later in the presentation, but you'll see that if they're not working together, you lose students through enrollments, you lose students through retentions, you're not able to create a shared vision, which is really what the next one is about, the stakeholder attunement. People support what they help create, and it's critical to have a shared strategy across an institution. And without consulting people prior to a decision being made, you get into the old way of organization change, which is decide, deliver, and then defend. And that just doesn't work anymore. So let's talk about this first one, holistic thinking. Holistic systems defined. What you're seeing is 2 airplanes, and this is a throwback to my days of flying. What you're seeing is a system, a bunch of parts working together to fly an airplane. That is the definition of a system. Now, you've really got 2 ways of thinking. You've got analytic thinking, which is starts with today, and it's really about solving problems. You break the issues down into their smallest components to be able to solve, and then you solve them separately. It really doesn't have any kind of far-reaching vision or goal, just the absence of the problem that you're trying to solve. Now, the holistic thinking is a little bit different. The holistic thinking believes that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It starts with the future, figures out how to get there through strategies. It allows the strategies to solve or avoid the problems, not focusing on the problems themselves. And the vision actually is the end game. It's not solving problems. Now, if we think about it, PhDs, faculty, and those administrators who move up into faculty, or I'm sorry, those faculty who move up into administrators, we're trained to be analytic thinkers. You think about the research paradigm. We most all come out with doing a PhD, and it's not through breakthrough theories and ideas, it's incremental changes to the current thoughts. And so we're trained to be analytic thinkers. And this doesn't help. I mean, when was the last time there was any kind of breakthrough research done? It's been many, many years. So, complexity is really the enemy of holistic thinking. You have to back out and see things from a bigger picture. Now, we're going to take a look here at the F-15 cockpit. You can see it is very, very complex. There's all sorts of different dials and gauges and everything else to tell you everything that's going on in the airplane. This was designed by engineers with very little input from the pilots, the people who are going to be flying and did fly the airplane. Now we see the F-35, which is the latest fighter to come out to the Navy and the Air Force and the Marine Corps. It actually has three different roles, the same airframe, which again is solving a major problem with funding. It's a costly system, but if you have one airframe that does three different missions, you save money in the long run. Now let's take a look at this. You can see over here you have the stick. That's the same thing that was in the middle here, but given the amount of G's, the gravity force that an airplane does, it makes much more sense to have that on the side where the pilot's elbow is sitting down on the console and braced. The gauges. This is your main gauge. It's obviously newer technology, but it incorporates all of these instruments that are over here into one thing, and there's a toggle switch on the stick here to help you be able to toggle from screen to screen as necessary. Again, designed by pilots, engineered by engineers, but with the pilot's mission in mind. So how do you defeat complexity? You have to keep a higher perspective and focus on the outcomes. That's the only way that you can do that. We talk about the airplane view or the helicopter view, where if you go up to 10,000 feet or 20,000 feet, you see the much bigger picture. Well, that's what we advise executives to do, is take a step back, take a look at what you're trying to accomplish and the outcomes that you want. And speaking of that, who is the customer for higher education? Is it the parents? Is it the students? Is it the businesses? Well, one of the things we suggest is you think about higher ed in a different way. Higher ed is a talent supply chain. What you're doing is taking a raw material off the street, your high school student or someone who's looking to move up in the jobs, and you're looking at what their focus has been, their extracurricular activities. You move them into the manufacturing plant, which is the college, and they've got to major, their internships, again, their extracurricular activities, and you're preparing them for that first job. So that is the finished product coming out of the manufacturing plant. Now, I know many universities do think of this way, but I would say the majority do not. They focus to say that the student is their customer. Unfortunately, you've got multiple customers. You have your students, you have the parents, you have the industry who is going to be hiring your graduates. This is really critical. So think of yourselves as the talent supply chain. Let's talk about alignment. Your strategies, your structures, and your processes must work together. Organization alignment. When things don't work together, your strategies, your structures, your processes, you typically will see a lack of results and you won't understand why they're not working together. But when they are working together, they're in alignment, you have your strategies, your people, and your processes all heading in the same direction, and you'll get results. Here's a good example of that. Most folks are familiar with the product life cycle. You've got the growth of an organization or a product over time. Well, you've got your concept creation, the development, the market development, the optimization, and then the harvesting over in here. Well, part of the challenge with that is you've got the decline, which is right over here. If your things are in alignment, if you've got good strategies, what happens is you go in and you reinvent the business. Now, this is exactly what has happened with higher ed, is it's in decline except for a very small thing. What we need to do is go in and reinvent the business so that we can get that uptick. Part of that is done through that alignment of strategies, processes, and your structure. Okay, so the last piece of this is stakeholder attunement. People support what they help create. And to talk about this, I've got a story. For those of you who've been in Los Angeles, you'd probably recognize the downtown landscape of the Westin Bonaventure Hotel. It's a beautiful hotel, and at night it's lit up. It's got different towers that are all lit up different colors. Well, little known story is that when they were designing it, believe it or not, they forgot the elevators. Now, this area right down here is the 4th floor, and they have shops, the pool is there, etc. And the elevators come up to right here. Well, what happened was they forgot how to get the elevators, you can see one of these here, up to the towers. So the engineers and the builders had the plans laid out on the floor, and it's like, okay, what's going on? And one of the workers walked by and, just kind of looked and listened a little bit. And one of the folks says, "Can I help you?" He says, "Well, I'm just kind of curious as what you're working on." And they kind of were a little bit miffed, but they said, why not? He says, "Well, we've got a problem here." And, okay, tell me about it. Well, the problem is that we don't have the elevators going up to the top of the towers. And the worker thought about it for a little bit and said, why not put them on the outside? Something they hadn't even thought about. Well, when you go through the West Los Angeles at night, you'll see the 4 towers here, and then you'll see the elevators in green, blue, yellow, and red, color-coded for the tower, going up and down at night. It is a beautiful sight. So how many of you have actually done a strategic plan without getting input from the frontline people, key stakeholders, who are actually dealing with customers, the students, the colleges on a daily basis? I can guarantee 99.9% of all C-level people at a higher ed institution are not in touch on a daily basis and really don't know what's going on in the trenches. So this is one way to talk about this attunement of your people. This is critical for developing that shared vision and really understanding what's going on. So let's talk about some holistic approaches to creating sustainable higher ed institutions. This is a model that we share with our customers and our clients, and it talks about how you look at an organization systemically and how you do planning. If you notice, there's the future environment, your ideal future, your feedback measures, strategies, business plans, priorities, and then actions, change, and follow-up, including program review. The key with this is there's 5 strategic questions. The first of this, your ideal future, is where do you want to be? What are your ends, your outcomes, your purposes, your goals? What's the holistic vision? B, feedback. How do you know when you get there? What are your customers' needs and wants in a quantifiable feedback system? Again, it's outside. It's not measuring inside. It's outside. C, where are we now? What's today's issues and problems? And then D, how are we going to get there? Your strategies, your actions, your change, your follow-up. How do you get there? And then lastly, E, your future environment. What will or may change in our environment in the future? Now, this one is critical. When most people do strategic planning, they don't think about it from a future perspective. But does that really make sense? When you're doing a plan, you're planning 3, 5, 10 years in the future. But if you're looking at your current environment, your plan is not going to be relevant in a very short period of time. So start with your end in mind. It requires leadership. It requires the change structures and the stakeholder attunement throughout the process. Now, this is a very systematized way of managing. Here you'll see GE's strategic management process. This is the calendar that they use for planning. And one of the interesting things is the majority of executives in the Fortune 500 are schooled. They grew up in GE, and then because there are only limited promotion opportunities in GE, they move over to other businesses. So very interesting. In the first quarter, it's all about getting things going for this coming year. The second quarter, there's surveys of employees, there's leadership performance reviews, and then making sure that they've got everything in alignment. In July, they develop their 3-year strategy. August, informal exchange of ideas, and then they put it into place. And then October, they start the same thing. They start the planning. They present the operating plans, and then they develop the agenda for the main meeting, the operating managers meeting in Boca Raton, 600 leaders, which is the whole new year and a whole new strategies. This is systematized within GE. One of the other big things you'll see is they have executive development and identifying and developing those high performance folks who are ready and could step into leadership positions. This is critical. You can see this whole process of strategy, strategic management is all systematized at GE. So let's talk about some of the tasks that we have. The first one of these is charting the course. And one of my favorite sayings when I talk about strategic planning is, where are you going? And from the book Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, the cat, Alice asks, would you please tell me which way I ought to go from here? The cat, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. Alice, I don't much care where. The cat, then it doesn't matter which way you go. Unfortunately, we have far too many higher ed institutions who do not do good planning, which is tantamount, or don't do planning at all, which is tantamount to saying, I really don't care where I'm going. This is very poor, and institutions need to do a better job of this. So let's talk a little bit about the process of strategic planning or strategic management. We start off up here at the top with outcomes, future state, and the brand promise. We'll talk a little bit more about brand promise, but really what that is what does your institution stand for? What are you known for? We get to the future environmental scan, which is looking out to your horizon 5 to 10 years to figure out what's actually going on. From that, we develop our future ideal vision, your mission, your core values, your positioning, and your rally cry. We come down, key success measures, metrics. Remember, we're measuring outcomes in the eyes of the customer. We're not measuring internal processes. We get down to a current state assessment, usually a SWOT or something like that. We make sure that the alignment of the delivery, the strategies, the structures, and the processes are aligned, the people are attuned, and we develop our strategies. 3-year business plans, the annual plans with budget set aside. Your budget is your affirmation of your strategic plan. I can't tell you the number of institutions who develop a strategic plan, but their budget really doesn't match up well with the plan or your annual plan. So it's like, why even bother to have a plan? The next thing, which is one of the big things that we see, is there's no distinct implementation plan that is critical for going forward. So if you don't have a plan, now IT projects generally have a plan, but do you have a plan for how you're going to implement your new marketing strategies? Or do you have a plan on how and when you're going to be developing new courses, new programs, etc.? This is all part of strategy implementation and enterprise-wide change. And lastly, do you do an annual strategic review and an updating of your plan? It's that feedback loop that we talked about in the previous slide. You've got to have these kind of things, and unless you do, you just keep doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. The secret sauce to this is a stakeholder attunement process. As you're going through each of these steps, you gather a group of key stakeholders together, and with that, you bounce off the ideas that you've been coming up with. This is a critical piece. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. So let's talk a little bit about competitive advantage, the brand promise, and positioning. Positioning really defines our driving force as the way we differentiate ourselves versus the competition. It's sometimes in the literature called the core strategy, but it's really how we achieve our sustained competitive advantage versus our competition. And there is competition in higher ed. We all know it. How do we sustain this over time? Your positioning answers the question, what is the one thing that is unique, different, and better about us in the eyes of the customer versus the competition in the higher ed marketplace that has them hiring our graduates or students wanting to attend our institution? The other side of this is, can we really be competitive in all customer wants? And the answer to that is absolutely not. So how do we distinguish ourselves? How do we brand ourselves across the entire institution in everything that we do, outward facing and inward facing? Here's an example of competitive advantage positioning in brand choice. In this particular model, there are 5 areas that you can be in: personal choice, caring service, high quality, total cost, and responsiveness. An example of personal choice with education programs is New College at the University of Alabama, where students come in and they develop their own degree program. The Fielding Graduate University, from where I did my graduate studies, is the same way. You have the ability, you have general programs and courses, quote, courses that you take, but within those courses, you work one-on-one with a mentor to, and you design in conjunction and with the mentor's help, what it is within that particular course or knowledge area you want to study. Caring service is another one. How many folks have rules, guidelines that you get in touch with a potential enrollee once you have a notice that they're interested within 2 hours? That's also responsiveness as well. But from a caring service perspective, your professors, are the office hours just 1 hour a week, or are they available for students when they truly need them? High quality, Carnegie Mellon, they've got the great classes in AI, artificial intelligence, and robotics, MIT, Harvard. Total cost, you're seeing a lot of online universities coming in and saying, we will save you money for your degree. Our tuition is less. Western Governors is a great example of this. Instead of paying per credit hour, you pay per semester. And you can take as many courses as you want in that semester. The move toward OER, the free textbooks, free journal articles. This is a total cost way that you're going. This is all about what your brand promise is. And it's critical that institutions understand these kind of things when they're planning. So that's what this brand promise is about right up here. The other big bugaboo that most higher ed institutions have has to do with accountability. Most folks here will probably know the RACI model: responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And this is about, planning and change, but mostly change management. Well, when we come through and we do a strategic plan for institutions, we set it all up as to who's responsible, involved, etc. But we also say when it's done, when does it need to be done, how do you measure it, and what the status is. And this information is reviewed on a monthly basis. So we spell out. And when we go through our process, because it is such a interactive process, we have never had an issue with someone saying they will be accountable for making sure things get done. Here's an example of what they come out with. This is for an institution that I worked with a while back, and they came up with 5 core strategies. First of that was creating value for board certification. The person who volunteered to be accountable for that was Nick, and there's a timeline here when it's done. The second, raising public awareness of the institution. Steve volunteered to do that. And these are some of the steps that, they do. New website, marketing plan, beginning to execute, what's the toolkit that they give to people when they first join the organization, etc. All of these kind of things are critical, but this biggest thing is the accountability, is to who will be accountable to make sure these things are done. It really goes back to ensuring the overall success. What are the priority action items that need to be accomplished, and who's going to step up and not say, I'll do them, but say, I'll be accountable to making sure they get done. Again, back to our diagram here, you can see it's in a circle. So there is follow-up to make sure that things get done. Program review is one of those critical things. Most faculty look at it as a pain in the neck, but are you including the program review, the program assessment at your board meetings with an eye of it informing your strategic plan? This is critical stuff. For example, most program review, they look at the courses, they look backwards. Are you looking at it in terms of number enrollees? Are you looking at it in terms of the demographics of those enrollees? Are you looking at it from the perspective of where are the students successful? Where are they struggling? And what needs to be done? And is the board getting that, executives and the board getting that information on at least an annual basis, if not more often, to be able to make the decisions they need in the institution? So let's move forward and talk a little bit about implementing changes. Implementing change requires three things. It requires good and ongoing planning. It requires, and you'll hear this again, the alignment of strategy, structures, and processes, and attunement of people to a shared vision. How many of our projects have not realized the results that we expected or wanted? Well, if you listen to the Project Management Institute, that's about 80%. 80% of all change efforts fail to get the results that are promised or expected. That's a huge number, and it's a huge issue for higher ed institutions. T.J. Rogers, in his book, No Excuses Management, said, most organizations don't fail for lack of talent or strategic vision. They fail for lack of execution, the routine blocking and tackling that great institutions consistently do well and strive to do better. What most people don't stop and think about is it's that plan, executing the implementation plan, that is critical in doing all these things. A colleague of mine years ago told me, anybody can develop strategies. I put my smartest people on implementing because I know it will get done. And even putting your smartest people on implementing, effective change takes 2 to 5 years, if it happens at all, with concentrated and continual actions. Yes, you can go and change your org chart, you can change your processes, but what you can't change overnight is people's mental attitudes. There are 6 phases to any change. The first is when the change is announced, there's a shock and denial. That happens during the kickoff when you communicate the changes. There's a hang-in point where people's morale, the organization's morale, will get very low, and they make a decision as to whether you go up the curve or you go down. Hope and adjustment, you reestablish directions and you begin the future planning, and you do the rebuilding of the organization. This cycle goes on through the announcement and then the planning of doing what you need to do, reorganizing the people and helping them deal with the loss, and then climbing back up the learning curve. This is critical. This is all critical stuff, and these phases need to be done in good order with people who know what they're doing. So making change stick is a really tricky thing. We've already talked about alignment of strategy, structures, and processes. We'll talk a little more. Attunement to the shared vision, because people support what they help create. But there's a psychology behind change. We're going to look at some change structures, HR initiatives, and celebrating some small wins. So alignment. Defining alignment is not easy. It's invisible to the naked eye. But we all know when things are not in alignment. For example, alignment is when everyone's working toward a common goal, a shared vision. But then when you've got faculty administration are at odds, that's not alignment. When your positioning matches your mission, your vision, you have centers of excellence that are going on, particularly that. But then you have some institutions which will say, we do everything great. And that certainly doesn't work. And it doesn't make sense because nobody can. When you're in alignment, your measurements, your metrics, your key success factors, they're focused on outcomes. But when they're not in alignment, institutions frequently miss their numbers. They're focused on processes, not outcomes. These are critical pieces. When you've got your alignment, your strategies, and your processes, your structures, they're all in alignment. One of the problems with not in alignment is you're attempting to do too many things at once and nothing gets finished. Also, a good balance of leadership and management. Leadership and management are two different things. But then you've got faculty governance run amok. Alignment is all about being able to do what you need to do when you need to do it. And literally, the sharpest knife cannot cut its own handle. When you're in the middle of a situation, in the middle of an organization, you don't necessarily know when things are in alignment or out of alignment unless you look at measurements and leadership and management. Are people working toward that common goal? Critical stuff, folks. This is an example of how things get in alignment with planning. You can see the various levels of the organization, the organization wide, your business units, your operating plans, and then your reward systems. Well, you've got four levels. You've got your strategic plan of 3, 5, or 10 years. We suggest somewhere between 5 and 10. You've got your 3-year business plans, and then your 12-month departmental plans. They all roll up to that strategic plan. And then with the performance and rewards management systems, you've got individual planning and goal setting. That's how you get your customer value. That's how you achieve your mission. Let's talk a little bit about structures. Oh, if they were only this simple. But usually they look like this, or more frequently like this. That is a challenge. So are you working in silos? Are you working across organizations? We believe that the most important thing with this is to have core strategies which go entirely across the organization. It's like the webbing on one of the old beach chairs we used to have that kind of interweaves across. You've got different functions, different silos, whether it's enrollment, whether it's advising, whether it's academics, finance. But if you have core strategies that go across all of those different functional areas, it keeps people in alignment. This is critical stuff. So let's talk about the last one, stakeholder attunement, people supporting what they help create. Nowadays, institutions have far more stakeholders than they ever used to have. You've got your administration, your faculty, alumni, the communities, the parents, the students. They all are stakeholders in the university, and they all feel like they have a say in how things are going. How many folks out there nowadays have a smartphone that has a camera and video function? Probably about 80% of the students out there. Everyone is a reporter. So if the university, one of the university employees, the administration, they say something and it gets on camera, it goes viral almost immediately. So we have to be very careful in how we address stakeholders, but more importantly, we need to have a shared vision of how we're moving forward. This old model where you had the trustees, you had the administration, and then working with everyone else, it doesn't work anymore. There's too many people out there who believe they should have a say in things, and it just doesn't work. So how do we deal with this? Well, let's talk first about resistance to change, because surprisingly enough, most people think resistance to change is only about people, and that's wrong. There are 3 different types of resistance to change. There's people, the mental models, but there's structures. What are the structures that you have in place to prevent people from doing their jobs properly? And then you have your patterns or your processes. Unfortunately, 90% of this stuff is below the surface, but it has a huge effect on this 10% of the what's visible to the public, to the students, etc. You've got three levels of resistance to change, and all of these have to be dealt with. The bottom line with the mental is people to choose to change or not to change based on their mental models and the trust they have in their leadership. You know, how many times has someone asked you to change and it's probably for your best, but you don't trust them and you say no? This is what happens in institutions. The vote of no confidence by the faculty senate is a huge thing because that's telling you we faculty do not have any faith that you're taking the organization in the right direction. This is a huge thing. So how do you do that? Really, it boils down to resistance to change boils down to three things. First is they don't get it, they don't get what you're doing, they don't like it, or they don't like you. It's all about leadership, folks. This is critical stuff. So how do you get this type of alignment, this attunement? It's not an easy process. We talked a little bit about it in the planning process of going out and talking with the key stakeholders, getting their input. We do this with each of our planning processes. There was one Air Force wing that we worked together who had a mission change from aerial refueling to unnamed reconnaissance vehicles or unmanned reconnaissance vehicles. The Global Hawk, the folks who go up and they, not the predators that shoot stuff at people, but they go out and they survey the battlefield. We did a full-on strategic planning process with them. It entailed probably 4 full sessions, each at least a day, but some of them 2 days, where we talked about each piece. And then they flew in 60 people from around the globe after each one of these sessions to discuss what the core planning team had come up with and give their input. Now, this had some incredible benefits, but I think what made it the most tangible was when they rolled out the strategic plan. And this is a wing of well over 1,000 people. When they rolled out the strategic plan to 500 people in the base theater, they literally got a standing ovation for the new plan. This was a fabulous thing, and I've never seen this in any organization, let alone the military. But what was even more neat to see was as they were talking about different strategies, you would see one person lean over to the next person saying, "That was my idea." That is how you get a shared vision across an organization. Now, it's not easy. This creativity that it requires in building one of these plans comes from intense dialogue and thought. It requires getting away and taking time to think and reflect. It's what some people saying working on the business versus in the business. So that's one piece. You know, it takes multiple sessions to get this thing done. But what it does, it improves the quality of the answers to the current and future challenges. It helps people really understand what's going on, and it builds that buy-in, that commitment to change that everybody needs to have to reduce the resistance to change. I mean, it's not an easy process, but it's very worthwhile. And again, we come back to the model. I don't have that here, I'm sorry. We come back to doing this each step of the way along the process. So let's talk a little bit about some of the change processes or structure that need to be in place when you're doing organization change, implementing your plan. The first is you need visionary leaders. You know, your CEO, your president, your chancellor, with personal leadership plans that they're performance plans are tied to the results. We talked about in the change management process about the resistance and people, the anger and the frustration when a change is announced. We tell our executives for the first 2 weeks, don't be sitting in your office hiding. Get out. You should have a repetitive stump speech and reinforce why we're doing this change and what's needed. If you've had the transparency, and I know transparency is not as good as it should be in most institutions. If you have the transparency on the finances, if you have transparency on people moves, things along those lines, then you're not going to get as much pushback because people will know already that there was a reason that you're doing a reorganization or you're laying off faculty or people or you're going to teach out some programs. This helps ensure the fit and get people moving toward that same vision and values. You have the project team. You have a project team set up to implement these kind of things. Frequently, this implementing a new program falls on the dean or a department chair or something like that. Why not have a separate person designed who can build this program and it doesn't fall on leadership? Because frankly, if you've got the day-to-day versus the change, the day-to-day, keeping the lights on, is going to win every time. You should have an executive committee which talks about what are the top 15 to 25 priorities from a yearly basis and making sure that people are still on track and doing this. This requires weekly meetings, weekly attention, or things will fall by the wayside. You have a change leadership steering committee, and this is really, quarterly or bi-monthly, every 2 months, follow-up meetings to track, adjust, and refine everything, including the plan if it's not working. This makes sure that there is follow-through via a yearly comprehensive map for implementation. And lastly, especially for IT projects, a program management office. Your program management office makes sure that people aren't walking on each other. It ensures that fit, the support, and the integration of projects. With an IT project, this is absolutely critical because no IT department has one single project. They're working on multiple projects at the same time, and they have to make sure that they don't bring down systems because one of them is working into something that they shouldn't be doing. So you can apply the same thing to manage enterprise-wide change with multiple projects, IT or not. So these are some of the change structures that we believe are important. But if you take a look too from an academic perspective, your curriculum committee. Curriculum committee faculty should be in charge of making sure the curriculum is up to date, things like that, and any changes that are done. So does your curriculum committee also take into account marketability of programs? In a curriculum committee that I led once, we had representatives from every department of the institution, including academics. So there were people from marketing, there were people from advising, there were people from IT, there were people from the finance office. All of these offices met with faculty on a monthly basis, sometimes twice a month, for implementing curriculum changes. In the first 2.5 years that I led the curriculum committee, we implemented 150 different curriculum changes. I mean, most institutions, especially state-run schools that have faculty senates, are lucky to get 3 changes through in that period of time. So this is just one of those structures. Assessment committee, are they looking at program assessment, program review? Technology, future environment committee, as part of the strategic plan, the SWOT committee. There's multiple other committees that you can put into place, but these are all critical for doing what you need to do and implementing the strategic plan. Let's talk a little bit about HR. Another one of my buddies, Albert's sayings is, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. Well, Jim Collins wrote a book about 10, 15 years ago called Good to Great. And he talked about this same thing about having the right people on the bus. Well, we take it a step forward. You've got to have the right people on the bus, but they've also got to be sitting in the right seat on the bus, i.e., is their skill set appropriate for not only what they're doing, but where they need to go? Do you have it tied to performance plans? Are there metrics around the values of the organization? Now, I'm not a big person I'm not a big proponent of performance plans and annual evaluations. I know some accreditors require them. I am much better, I'm a much bigger advocate of when you have a program where faculty and supervisors or employees and supervisors meet on a quarterly basis just to review what they are doing. It doesn't mean that it isn't formalized, it certainly can be, but most performance evaluations are done on an annual basis, and that just doesn't work because nobody takes the time to brief people on their performance or anything else like that. In fact, some of the Fortune companies, GE being one of them, have done away with performance evaluations altogether, and they have a little app where an employee can reach out to their supervisor and get feedback either via the app or schedule an appointment to do that. I mean, this is much more effective, and instead of going a year between evaluations, you can make small course corrections so things don't become a problem. The last thing about change is a critical thing, is buying into a shared vision. Change has got to be connected to a higher purpose, and making more money is not a higher purpose. People commit to causes, they don't commit to plans. And so, why are you making these changes? Why should I invest myself in this change if I'm an employee? People commit to causes, they don't commit to plans. So let's talk a little bit about sustaining that change, or as my buddy Dilbert would say, lead, follow, or get out of the way. My favorite all-time Dilbert cartoon. Is your project plan done? I can't do a plan until you tell me the strategy. My strategy is to make you do a plan. Sometimes leadership just radiates from my body. Well, unfortunately, we see far too many leaders in higher ed who depict Dilbert's manager. They're chosen for leadership positions not based on their ability to work with people, to lead people, but on publication records and the academic side. And the business side, it may be about results. They can get great results, but they don't really know how to work with people who are their peers or their supervisors. And so this is one of those critical things. Leadership is critical. Kouzes and Posner's define leadership as the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. Again, we have this shared vision piece, this cause that we're committing to. Leadership is an art. There's science in it, there's theory behind it, but it's the art of building relationships and maintaining relationships. It's about mobilizing others. It's getting others to move forward to struggle to get those shared visions. It's a very, very deep thing. We can spend 2 hours in looking at all the implications. But let's take a look, because in the literature, we know there's a difference between managers and leaders. Managers really handle things. They do budgets, forecasting schedules, and they're looking at what's going on today. Whereas leaders' vision, they're looking at both tomorrow as well as today. It's about getting a group to go somewhere, about guiding people on a journey. And as Drucker and Bennis said, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Both roles are critical within an organization. but they differ profoundly. I often observe people in top positions doing the wrong things really, really well. It comes down, leadership really comes down to credibility and trust. Is there a competency there? Is there a technical expertise? Is there the ability to build relationships? And is there the ability to trust? So let's put it all together. We've developed this metric which helps place organizations on the ladder of where they really are today. Down at the bottom, we see the reactive. Basically, organizations in the survival, they may do budgets, they have financial objectives. The traditional is they do annual planning, they may do 3-year budget forecasts, they may do an annual retreat, and they've probably got vision, mission, and values, but they really don't understand what they are. The mission is what you do and why you do it, who you do it to. Your vision is where you're going. It's futuristic. But the values are your guidelines as to how you make your decisions. Yes, the values of the organization are important, but how do you make your decisions? Is it based on your values? Do you rank profits higher than people? Do you rate student outcomes higher than your people? A good example of this is Southwest Airlines. Their top value, they have their values pyramid, and their top value is taking care of their employees. They believe very strongly that if you take care of your employees, the employees will take care of the customers. Their bottom value is financial performance. They believe that the top two will take care of the bottom. So what's your hierarchy of values, and how do you use those values to make your decisions? The proactive is having business unit plans tied to your annual planning, doing actual strategic planning across the organization, or lastly, the 21st century holistic management systems, which we do, is putting all of these things together, the planning, the business unit planning, making sure there's the retreats, the budget forecast, and putting a system in place similar to what we're going to see here that does all these things. This strategic management process, we showed you one from GE. This is how we do it for higher ed. You have your board of trustees, corporate retreat, and meeting where they start their initial planning for the year in January. Then you're talking about the different possibilities across the institution, your stakeholder attunement process in through there, and then figuring out what are your early learnings. Your planning process really for the upcoming years happens in this first quarter. Then you're going back to get some more feedback for student surveys, faculty surveys, etc. You're finalizing your plans, your trustees meeting, rolling out the plans for next year, and implementing those best practices. Then you're taking a look at your 1 to 3 year strategies. What are the new things that are going on? Who are your high performers? Who do you want to be moving up into higher positions? And then in October, you're starting the cycle all over again. What do we need to start looking at? So we systematize this for higher ed. It's one of those critical things. So when we come in and work with an organization, we first assess it for its strengths, its areas of growth, look at the external environment. We position the university so that it's unique and branded, similar to Carnegie Mellon. And then we facilitate the strategic and academic long-term plans with the stakeholder attunement process and metrics, help you put together your 1 to 3 year operational plans, develop the change management plans that include org redesign if necessary, your management structures, governance, incentive and rewards, program review and replacement. and then we help you implement that change. This is the prescription that we have when we work with most institutions, and it works very well. We also can help building leadership capacity and training and coaching. The bottom line with any kind of implementing a strategic change is inevitable. The growth is the optional thing. Or again, as my buddy Albert would say, we can't solve our problems with the same level of thinking we used when we created them. So we thank you very much for your attention today. If there's any questions, feel free to email them. And thank you for your participation.